The global conflicts that changed history. The First and Second World Wars were massive global upheavals that dramatically transformed the course of human events. These weren't just confrontations between military forces, they were colossal clashes that redrew borders, reshaped civilizations, and left enduring emotional and societal wounds on both countries and people. To truly grasp their vast influence, we must explore the origins, progressions, and consequences of these wars, revealing how they forged the contemporary world. The groundwork for the First World War was laid during the early 1900s amidst rising nationalism, increasing militarization, and tangled international alliances. Imagine a coiled spring under enormous pressure, on the verge of snapping with the slightest disturbance. Tensions soared across Europe as nations like Germany, Austria-Hungary, and France competed for supremacy. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria in June 1914 became the catalyst that set off this precarious chain reaction. In the wake of his death, a series of rapid developments unfolded. Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia, triggering a domino effect due to entangled alliances, swiftly involving the world's major powers. The Central Powers, Germany, Austria-Hungary, and later the Ottoman Empire, entered into conflict with the Allied powers, which included France, Russia, and the United Kingdom. By August 1914, the continent of Europe was plunged into a war that would stretch over 4 harrowing years. Combat had evolved drastically. Traditional battlefield tactics became obsolete. War was now fought from trenches. Imagine bleak, soggy battle zones where soldiers endured cramped, unhygienic surroundings, constant bombardment, and the ever-present danger of death. The Western Front, extending from the North Sea to the Swiss border, symbolized a prolonged deadlock, with both forces suffering enormous losses. Battles such as the Somme and Verdun highlighted the horrific nature of this type of combat, where millions died for negligible territorial gains. As fighting wore on, its toll extended beyond the front lines. On the domestic fronts, propaganda filled the press to galvanize public support. Citizens rationed food and supplies to help sustain the war effort. In numerous nations, women assumed jobs traditionally held by men, working in munitions factories and fulfilling essential roles, permanently altering societal dynamics. The war also deeply affected colonial regions. People in these territories served under their imperial rulers, believing their loyalty would be honored with greater freedoms. This optimism later fueled independence movements throughout Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. By 1918, the conflict neared its conclusion. The Central Powers were unraveling, grappling with internal rebellion and economic devastation. In November of that year, an armistice was signed, halting active fighting. The war officially ended with the Treaty of Versailles in 1919, which imposed heavy penalties on Germany and redrew the European map. However, the treaty bred resentment and economic hardship in Germany, planting the seeds for future turmoil. Fast forward to the 1930s. The global community was still grappling with World War I's aftermath. The Great Depression and political chaos created fertile ground for authoritarian leaders. In Germany, Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party exploited national frustration, promoting a doctrine rooted in nationalism and territorial ambition. In Italy, Benito Mussolini's fascist regime shared similar goals. Meanwhile, Japan initiated aggressive military expansion throughout Asia. When Germany invaded Poland on September 1, 1939, it officially launched the Second World War. The swift and ruthless German strategy, called Blitzkrieg or Lightning War, shocked the globe. Picture rapid tank assaults and aerial bombings that dismantled defenses in mere days, showcasing a frightening evolution in military power. The conflict escalated rapidly, engulfing Europe and soon pulling in countries worldwide. The original Allied powers, Britain and France, were later joined by the Soviet Union and the United States after Japan's surprise attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941. Unlike its predecessor, this war reached nearly every part of the planet, making it a truly global conflict. One of the darkest and most horrific episodes of World War II was the Holocaust. 6 million Jews, along with millions of other individuals targeted by the Nazis, were murdered in a systematic campaign of genocide. This atrocity remains one of the most chilling examples of what can occur when hate and tyranny go unchecked. Inside concentration camps, people were stripped of their dignity and humanity, creating a somber legacy that still haunts collective memory. World War II mobilized entire societies. Civilians weren't just bystanders, they worked in armament factories, served auxiliary roles, and adapted to wartime realities. Rationing, state propaganda, and bombing raids became daily experiences. The Battle of Britain exemplified this. The British population endured continuous aerial attacks, but stood firm in resistance. As the war neared its peak, critical battles began to turn the tide. The Soviet victory at Stalingrad and the Allied landing at Normandy D-Day were pivotal moments. By 1945, Germany surrendered unconditionally, followed shortly by Japan after the US dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. This war left an unmatched imprint on history. With an estimated 70 to 85 million deaths, it became the deadliest conflict ever recorded. Its aftermath saw the formation of the United Nations, designed to promote peace and international dialogue. The world order was permanently altered as the United States and the Soviet Union emerged as rival superpowers, marking the beginning of the Cold War. These two world wars serve as stark reminders of the complexities within human societies, the perils of unchecked authority, and the catastrophic impact of unresolved disputes. They show how quickly global harmony can unravel, and how decisions made by a few can ripple out to affect countless ordinary lives. As we ponder these turbulent chapters of the past, they urge us to prioritize diplomacy, empathy, and global cooperation to build a more stable world. The legacies of these wars continue to shape international relations today, compelling us to remember history in order to create a better and more peaceful future. The American Revolution Reimagined. The American Revolution, frequently hailed as the foundation of modern democratic ideals, was far more than a mere conflict between Great Britain and its 13 American colonies. It represented a sweeping ideological shift, a fierce pursuit of liberty, self-rule, and a reimagining of personal rights. Visualize 13 separate colonies, each with its own distinct character, unified by mounting frustration with a remote monarchy that governed without consent. This shared grievance would erupt into a revolution that sent ripples through the world, transforming global history. Well before the first shots were exchanged at Lexington and Concord, the roots of rebellion had already taken hold. Burdened by crushing debt following the costly French and Indian War, the British Crown turned to its American colonies for financial support. Taxes such as the 1765 Stamp Act and the 1767 Townshend Acts were imposed, igniting fierce backlash from colonists who had no voice in Parliament. The phrase, "no taxation without representation," became a rallying call, a defiant demand for justice and autonomy. Picture a busy Boston tavern buzzing with discussion, where farmers, artisans, and merchants voiced their growing unrest over tankards of ale. Discontent gave way to protest, most notably the Boston Tea Party of 1773, in which colonists disguised as Mohawk Indians dumped crates of British tea into the harbor in a bold rejection of unjust taxation. The swirling waters of Boston Harbor became a symbol of defiance and growing rebellion. Tensions reached a boiling point on April 19, 1775, when British soldiers clashed with local militias in the towns of Lexington and Concord. The morning silence was shattered by musket fire, marking what came to be known as the shot heard round the world. These confrontations were not isolated skirmishes, but the opening salvos of a revolutionary movement that would confront imperial dominance and challenge monarchy itself. As conflict deepened, The Continental Congress emerged as the body aiming to unify the colonies under a shared cause. By June 1776, the concept of full independence had gained momentum. In Philadelphia, delegates convened to draft what would become the Declaration of Independence, with Thomas Jefferson penning its stirring language. The document asserted that all individuals are inherently equal and possess inalienable rights, a radical vision that echoed far beyond its time. Imagine the intensity and anticipation inside Independence Hall as delegates debated and ultimately signed this daring document. It was a formal break from British rule and a bold step toward self-governance. Yet, the road to liberty was anything but smooth. The Continental Army, a collection of poorly equipped militias and citizen soldiers, faced off against the British military, then one of the strongest forces in the world. Under General George Washington's command, the American troops endured immense suffering. Picture the bleak winter of 1777 at Valley Forge, where soldiers wrapped in threadbare coats battled hunger and freezing cold. Despite their hardships, their belief in freedom never wavered. Significant victories, such as the 1777 triumph at Saratoga, breathed new hope into the cause and persuaded France to join the conflict as an ally, offering critical resources and support. What began as a colonial uprising had now transformed into an international war. French troops and naval forces reinforced the American struggle, culminating in the pivotal siege of Yorktown in 1781. Envision the jubilation as British General Cornwallis surrendered to combined American and French forces, a triumph that would reverberate through history. The war officially concluded with the Treaty of Paris in 1783, recognizing American independence and giving birth to the United States. However, winning freedom was only the beginning. The newly sovereign states faced daunting questions about how to govern, unify, and protect individual rights. The initial governing framework, the Articles of Confederation, proved inadequate, prompting leaders to gather in 1787 for the Constitutional Convention. The result was the U.S. Constitution, a blueprint for a new government rooted in popular sovereignty. Later, the Bill of Rights was adopted to secure essential civil liberties. Still, the lofty promises of the Revolution were not fully realized. The Declaration's vision of equality stood in contrast to ongoing injustices. Slavery persisted, women remained disenfranchised, and Native American communities faced continued marginalization. These deep contradictions would influence the nation's story for generations. The American Revolution's influence reached far beyond North America. Its message inspired worldwide movements, from the French Revolution to independence struggles across Latin America. It demonstrated that everyday people could rise up, defy tyranny, and construct a government based on freedom and justice. Looking back, it's clear that the American Revolution was not just a battle for political separation. It was a monumental shift in global political thinking and human aspiration. It showcased the strength of united action, the determination of people seeking liberty, and the lasting power of revolutionary ideals. Through the grit and vision of its revolutionaries, the American colonies did more than defeat an empire. They laid the foundation for a new nation and inspired generations to come. The legacy of the American Revolution stands as a testament to the courage to oppose injustice, the resilience of shared purpose, and the unwavering hope for a better tomorrow. The Enlightenment Reimagined. The period known as the Enlightenment, frequently referred to as the Age of Reason, was a groundbreaking epoch that revolutionized how humanity interpreted existence. Stretching from the closing years of the 1600s into the late 1700s, this era witnessed the rise of rationality as a guiding light, dispelling centuries of ignorance, superstition, and unquestioned customs. It confronted long-standing beliefs and ushered in transformative shifts in politics, ethics, and social norms. This widespread intellectual awakening not only destabilized traditional power structures, but also laid down the intellectual foundations for contemporary democratic values, civil liberties, and scientific innovation, steering Western civilization onto a radically new course. The intellectual seeds of this period were sown during the scientific revolution. Visionaries like Galileo Galilei and Isaac Newton demonstrated that nature operated under consistent, understandable laws, instilling a new trust in empirical study and analytical reasoning. Inspired by these achievements, Enlightenment philosophers sought to apply scientific principles to social, political, and moral questions. They held firm to the belief that rational thinking and observable evidence could elevate humanity and reform its institutions, freeing individuals from the grip of superstition and authoritarian rule. A core principle of Enlightenment thinking was that human intellect, rather than divine command or inherited tradition, was the primary driver of understanding and progress. This marked a dramatic shift from previous eras where sacred authority and rigid hierarchies dictated reality. Prominent Enlightenment thinkers, known as philosophes, maintained that truth could be uncovered through logic and investigation. This belief system not only empowered individuals but also threatened the established dominance of monarchies and religious institutions, both of which had long served as gatekeepers of knowledge and control. One pivotal figure, René Descartes, often hailed as the progenitor of modern philosophy, exemplified this push for mental independence. His iconic statement, "Cogito, ergo sum, I think, therefore I am," emphasized the primacy of thought in establishing existence. By doubting accepted truths and promoting skepticism as a means to deeper understanding, Descartes laid down the philosophical framework for the Enlightenment's emphasis on individual critical thought. Equally transformative was John Locke, whose political theories reshaped ideas about government and personal rights. In his landmark work, Two Treatises of Government, Locke asserted that all humans are naturally entitled to life, liberty, and property. He contended that the legitimacy of rulers stems from the approval of those they govern, and that their main role is to protect these rights. These revolutionary principles opposed the belief in the divine right of kings and ignited democratic uprisings, especially influencing the American and French revolutions. Another towering intellect, Voltaire, became one of the Enlightenment's boldest and most scathing voices. Known for his sharp satire and relentless criticism of religious dogma and despotic regimes, Voltaire championed the rights to free speech, religious acceptance, and civil freedom. His razor-sharp wit exposed the double standards of those in power, making him a powerful emblem of Enlightenment justice. His widely attributed statement, "I disapprove of what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it," captured the spirit of open expression that defined the age. Baron de Montesquieu, another major contributor, introduced the theory of separated governmental powers. In his seminal treatise, The Spirit of the Laws, he proposed that political authority should be split into legislative, executive, and judicial branches to prevent tyranny and protect individual freedoms. His ideas heavily influenced the structural design of modern democratic governments, including that of the United States. The Enlightenment extended beyond political philosophy and into the realm of education and knowledge sharing. Denis Diderot's ambitious venture, the Encyclopedia, aimed to compile the sum of human understanding and make it broadly available. This colossal work reflected the Enlightenment conviction that education was essential for progress and that knowledge should be democratized, not restricted to the privileged few. Despite its progressive ideals, the Enlightenment was riddled with contradictions. Many of its leading voices failed to apply their visions of freedom and equality to women, enslaved individuals, and indigenous communities. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, for example, passionately defended personal liberty and participatory government, yet espoused limiting views on women's societal roles, often confining them to domestic spheres. However, reformers like Mary Wollstonecraft rose to confront such disparities. In her pioneering text, A Vindication of the Rights of Woman, she advocated for gender parity and emphasized the critical role of education for women, laying the early groundwork for feminist philosophy. The Enlightenment also wrestled with the conflict between rational thought and emotional depth. While logic was exalted as the supreme path to truth, emotions, creativity, and spirituality were sometimes undervalued. This imbalance would later be addressed by the Romantic movement, which aimed to blend reason with wonder, imagination, and the emotional richness of human experience. Politically, the Enlightenment had earth-shattering consequences. In America, the ideas of Locke, Montesquieu, and others helped shape the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, founding documents that established a nation based on liberty and representative government. In France, Enlightenment writings by Rousseau, Voltaire, and Diderot fueled revolutionary fervor, leading to the overthrow of the monarchy and a radical reimagining of society. These revolutions weren't just political shifts. They were embodiments of Enlightenment philosophy, demanding accountability from those in power and honoring individual dignity and rights. The impact of the Enlightenment continues to resonate. It provided the intellectual scaffolding for the modern age, influencing everything from the evolution of human rights to the global embrace of secularism and scientific investigation. Its legacy, rooted in inquiry, doubt, and pursuit of knowledge, shapes how we analyze today's challenges and aspirations. Yet the Enlightenment also reminds us that progress is neither linear nor flawless. Its own contradictions between idealism and exclusion, logic and feeling, echo the ongoing challenge of creating a just and balanced world. Ultimately, the Enlightenment was a bold intellectual revolution, a call to challenge old assumptions, to question with courage, and to envision a more enlightened society. Its influence endures in democratic values, scientific advancement, and the global pursuit of justice. The flame of reason it sparked continues to illuminate our path forward, affirming that once the light of inquiry is kindled, it cannot be extinguished. Napoleon's era of upheaval. The series of conflicts now referred to as the Continental Conflagration, which took place between 1803 and 1815, marks a pivotal era in the chronicles of European civilization, a time of sweeping socio-political upheaval, unending military strife, and the boundless aspirations of a single extraordinary figure, Napoleon Bonaparte. Envision a continent consumed by chaos, where revolutionary principles collided violently with imperial supremacy, and ancient monarchies struggled to adapt to unprecedented change. It was an epoch where empires ascended and crumbled, territorial lines shifted like drifting sands, and the essence of European society was irrevocably transformed. The origins of this turbulent period trace back to the French Revolution of 1789, which dismantled long-standing dynastic rule and unleashed cries for freedom, justice, and fraternity. In the midst of this upheaval, a young general from Corsica named Napoleon Bonaparte emerged, offering a semblance of order and brilliance. Celebrated for his strategic brilliance and magnetic leadership, Napoleon quickly rose through the military ranks, earning both the admiration and allegiance of the French populace. By 1799, he orchestrated a coup d'état, claiming control as first consul. Then, in a bold and theatrical gesture of authority in 1804, he crowned himself Emperor of France at Notre Dame Cathedral, defiantly asserting autonomy from all external powers, including the Pope. As Napoleon tightened his grip on power, his grand designs unsettled the royal houses of Europe, who regarded him as the embodiment and promoter of revolutionary instability. Nations such as Britain, Austria, Russia, and Prussia coalesced to mount opposition against the burgeoning French menace. Thus began an era of relentless warfare, with Napoleon perpetually at the heart of the tempest. Napoleon's martial exploits became legendary. The Grande Army, a force of extraordinary discipline and logistical prowess, moved with startling speed and executed campaigns with surgical precision. In 1805, at the iconic Battle of Austerlitz, also known as the Battle of the Three Emperors, Napoleon vanquished the united armies of Austria and Russia through brilliant misdirection and impeccable positioning. The victory not only affirmed his genius but etched his name among the greatest military commanders in history. Picture the fog-laden battlefield, where his troops maneuvered with such perfection that even adversaries stood in awe. At the zenith of his dominance, Napoleon radically redrew the European map. He dissolved the archaic Holy Roman Empire, replacing it with the Confederation of the Rhine, a coalition of French-aligned principalities. His legal innovations, codified in the Napoleonic Code, introduced progressive ideals of equality before the law and secular governance across vast territories, imprinting a legacy that endured long beyond his reign. Yet, his aspiration for a unified Europe under French supremacy ignited fierce resistance. Nationalist fervor simmered in regions like Spain and the German states as populations yearned for autonomy and bristled under foreign dominion. Nowhere was defiance more vivid than in the Peninsular Campaign. Initially welcomed as deliverers, French soldiers soon encountered intense guerrilla opposition from Spanish rebels, aided by British forces under the command of the Duke of Wellington. Visualize the rugged Iberian landscape, where everyday civilians morphed into stealthy fighters, ambushing French units and vanishing into the wilderness. This prolonged conflict drained France's strength and morale, inflicting slow but steady damage on Napoleon's realm. The true unraveling began in 1812 with Napoleon's disastrous march into Russia, aimed at enforcing his continental system, a blockade intended to cripple Britain economically. With over 600,000 troops, he penetrated deep into Russian territory, only to face a calculated scorched earth resistance. Towns and supplies were burned, luring the French deeper into a trap. When Napoleon arrived in Moscow, he found it deserted and ablaze, offering neither shelter nor triumph. As winter descended, the Grande Army was ravaged by starvation, illness, and the bitter cold. Imagine an army once deemed invincible now reduced to a gaunt, frozen procession, harassed constantly by enemy forces. Of the original contingent, fewer than 50,000 survived the retreat. This catastrophic failure shattered Napoleon's myth of invincibility. Sensing opportunity, coalition forces pressed forward and captured Paris in 1814. Napoleon was forced to abdicate and was exiled to the island of Elba. But his saga did not end there. In 1815, Napoleon made a spectacular return during what came to be known as the 100 Days. He rallied supporters and briefly reclaimed leadership, but this final act culminated in the fateful Battle of Waterloo. Facing a joint army led by Britain's Duke of Wellington and Prussian commander Gebhard Leibericht von Blücher, the clash turned into a harrowing melee of artillery, cavalry, and infantry. Though Napoleon saw early gains, his forces were eventually defeated. This loss marked the end of his rule, and he was sent into permanent exile on the remote island of St. Helena, where he lived out the remainder of his days. The continental conflagration irrevocably altered Europe's political and social landscape. It revolutionized military doctrine, fostered burgeoning nationalist movements, and set the stage for future revolutions and national unifications. In its wake, the Congress of Vienna sought to restore equilibrium by redrawing borders and creating diplomatic frameworks that would sustain Europe for years to come. Nevertheless, the principles of liberty and equality, championed and contradicted by Napoleon himself, endured, shaping modern ideologies and reformist movements well into the 19th and 20th centuries. The tale of Napoleon's age is one of boundless ambition and groundbreaking innovation, fierce resistance, and enduring perseverance. It is the story of how one man's indomitable will and visionary leadership redefined an entire continent's destiny, leaving an imprint that continues to captivate and influence the course of history. In contemplating this chapter, we are reminded of the enduring tension between authority, belief, and the human spirit, a dynamic that remains ever relevant in our unfolding global narrative. The expansion of global colonial dominance. The ascent of global colonial dominance from the 15th to the 20th century signaled a pivotal transformation in the chronicles of humanity, an epic shaped by navigation, subjugation, and the global reorganization of entire civilizations. Envision the Earth as an enormous chart of undiscovered waters and enigmatic territories, with European kingdoms propelled by desire, avarice, and an unrelenting quest for enlightenment, casting their ambitions over the seas. What ensued was a tempest of exploration and authority. a movement that sparked rivalry, initiated intercultural interaction, and left behind enduring and frequently distressing consequences that still reverberate today. Colonialism's foundation was laid during what we now call the Age of Discovery, which commenced near the end of the 15th century as European states pursued fresh passages to reach the East. The collapse of Constantinople in 1453 severed crucial land-based trading paths to Asia, prompting an urgent and relentless pursuit for alternate sea routes to the wealth of the Orient. During this quest, notable figures such as Christopher Columbus, Vasco da Gama, and Ferdinand Magellan launched expeditions that would completely alter the map of the known Earth. Visualize Columbus aboard 3 modest vessels, fragile yet courageous, venturing into the Atlantic, their wooden decks burdened with aspirations of reaching Asia. Instead, he arrived in the Caribbean, inadvertently revealing an entirely new continent. This breathtaking revelation fueled fervent desire and a surge of European ambition to seize lands and riches. Spain and Portugal swiftly took the lead, building massive dominions spanning the Americas, Africa, and Asia. The unearthing of vast reserves of gold and silver in the Americas inundated Europe's financial systems, spurring further maritime journeys and transforming European economies. Picture the bustling port of Seville, where Spanish galleons returned overloaded with gold, silver, and priceless goods from the Americas. This influx elevated Spain to a position of immense global might, but the gains came with grave consequences. Indigenous societies in the Americas suffered enslavement, displacement, and widespread death from European illnesses. Entire civilizations were dismantled under the weight of empire. Ancient empires such as the Aztecs and Incas crumbled under the weapons and warfare of conquistadors like Hernan Cortés and Francisco Pizarro. By the 1600s, more European nations joined the colonial contest. England, France, and the Netherlands entered the stage. Unlike Spain and Portugal, they emphasized trade networks and founded colonies across North America, the Caribbean, and parts of Asia. This era witnessed the emergence of joint stock enterprises like the British East India Company and the Dutch East India Company, which revolutionized imperialism by blending private commerce with imperial strategy. These corporate entities commanded extraordinary power. They managed territories, engaged in warfare, and amassed huge wealth through the exchange of spices, fabrics, and enslaved humans. Imagine the crowded ports of Amsterdam or London, filled with ships stacked with sugar, tobacco, and exotic spices. These luxuries, harvested from colonies abroad, fueled Europe's industrial progress, but were built upon a foundation of forced labor and the abuse of local communities. Among colonialism's darkest legacies was the Atlantic slave trade, born from the insatiable appetite for plantation labor in the New World. Countless Africans were violently uprooted from their homes, subjected to unbearable torment, and transported across oceans, forever altering the social makeup of the Atlantic sphere. But colonial history wasn't only about economic exploitation. It also served as a catalyst for immense cultural interaction. European missionaries journeyed across continents to propagate Christianity, often displacing native spiritual traditions. Picture a remote community where foreign preachers introduced unfamiliar faiths, eroding the region's ancestral customs and deeply altering its cultural identity. While some indigenous groups absorbed European influences, others fiercely resisted, resulting in rebellions and prolonged battles. The Enlightenment in the 18th century ushered in revolutionary concepts that questioned the ethical and moral underpinnings of colonial expansion. Thinkers like John Locke and Jean-Jacques Rousseau highlighted personal liberty and the significance of consent in governance, ideas that began to challenge the righteousness of imperial domination. These philosophies also planted the seeds for independence movements within colonies. The American Revolution and the Haitian Uprising revealed that those under foreign rule could rise, resist, and triumph over their imperial oppressors, establishing a framework for global liberation efforts. As the 19th century unfolded, the Industrial Revolution fundamentally altered the trajectory of colonialism. Steam engines, railways, and telegraphs enabled quicker access to resources and allowed empires to maintain stricter control over their distant territories. European expansion surged into Africa and Asia, frequently cloaked in justifications of civilizing missions. This chapter, often termed the era of new imperialism, brought about fierce territorial competition, exemplified by the Berlin Conference of 1884 to 1885, where European states partitioned the African continent without acknowledging its native peoples or cultures. Ironically, the very mechanisms used to strengthen empire, education, infrastructure, and communication began to fuel the fires of rebellion. Nationalist icons like Mahatma Gandhi in India and Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana rose to prominence, using Enlightenment principles and the growing unrest of the oppressed to demand freedom. By the middle of the 20th century, the brutal aftermath of two world wars had undermined the justification for colonial rule, sparking a wave of decolonization that dramatically reshaped global relations. The emergence of colonial empires is one of history's greatest paradoxes, a saga of ambition, ingenuity, and technological progress intertwined with brutal oppression and widespread suffering. It connected previously isolated regions of the world, ignited cross-cultural interaction, and revolutionized commerce on an international scale. But it also deepened global inequities, trampled human dignity, and left painful scars still visible today. Even in our present, the echoes of colonial rule ripple through politics, economies, and cultural identities, reminding us of the intricate legacy of empire. As we examine this period, we're confronted with an enduring truth. The unbridled pursuit of dominance and wealth often exacts a tremendous human toll. The tale of colonialism ultimately stands as both a warning and a reflection of humankind's dual nature, capable of creating wonders and inflicting destruction, emphasizing the need for balance between ambition and ethical responsibility in shaping our shared future.